All right, let's kick things off. My name is Ross Lebetkin. I'm the CEO of Welligence Energy Analytics, an upstream oil and gas research house. With that, I'd like to introduce our panelists today. From left to right, we have Rahul Dhir, CEO of Tullow, Nina Koch, Senior Vice President of Equinor, Luca Vignati, Upstream Director from Eni, and Gbite Falade, CEO from Aradel Holdings. As the title denotes, this panel is about Africa's resources. It's about developing those resources. It's about understanding what makes Africa an attractive place for investment and why Africa has a bright future and will become an incredibly critical piece of the global energy matrix. And everyone on this panel today is a key contributor to that future. So we have a really nice mix of E&Ps on this panel of differing sizes and focal areas. But one thing in common is a significant presence and focus on Africa. So to start off, I'd like to sort of go around the panel and talk about why Africa is such an important piece of your story. So with that, Rahul, Africa is at the core of Tullow's business. Looking at the positives, what has attracted Tullow to the region, and what keeps you focused on Africa compared to diversification to other regions like, say, Latin America, North Sea, and Asia?
So look, Tullow's been in Africa for over 2 decades, and I think, as you said, it's a very singular focus for the company. Now, I think the big thing, and I expect you'll hear this from others as well, which is attractive, is of course the resource and the scale of it. Tullow pioneered many discoveries in Ghana and Uganda, Kenya. Our biggest field in Jubilee, which is Jubilee in Ghana, just exceeded 100,000 barrels a day, almost 12 years after production. So it gives you a sense of the scale of the opportunity. We have a resource in Kenya, which is over 600 million barrels. So that's obviously one thing that certainly attracts us. I think the second really is the opportunity set. And companies like Tullow really occupy the independence. We occupy the white space that the big companies leave behind. 20 years ago, that was frontier exploration. I think now it's much more around mid to late life production, and that's really a fit for our skill set. So we see, as we go forward, kind of the addressable market, if you will, for a company like ours is kind of expanding. And the last one, I think, is quite important, and it was interesting to hear His Excellency, the Deputy President, talk about this as well. The narrative, I think, around the importance of oil and gas is changing. I think he acknowledged the importance of oil and gas in meeting in the Sustainable Development Goals. I think there is an increasing recognition that Africa needs to benefit from its resources. There is an increasing recognition that responsible oil and gas development is very integral to the economic development of this continent. So we feel aligns really well with our sense of purpose. And to give you, again, the kind of sense of the scale of how this industry can have an impact is last year, our operated fields in Ghana contributed almost $1.5 billion of really hard, tangible revenue for the nation. So that opportunity to have an impact, I think, is also very significant for us.
Thank you for that, Rahul. So you mentioned the focus on the scale of the opportunity a few times. Shifting from an independent to sort of the majors here, where scale is obviously critical for developments. Nina, how does Africa fit within Equinor's broader portfolio, and really, how does Africa compete for capital internally in a company with so many projects?
Yeah, thank you, Ross. So Equinor has been in Africa for more than 30 years, and I think we have a really exciting and a good portfolio. It's a combination of legacy oil assets, but also new gas opportunities. So I think there is kind of this set of opportunities in our portfolio in Africa based on the positions and the assets we already have. It's hard to compete these days. It's not just about capital, though. It's also about resources. I mean, the personnel in the companies, the supply industry actually also, but and then also I would say the attention in the majors. Africa is material, like 30 to 40% of the production and revenues internationally outside Norway, which is kind of our base is now provided from Africa. And we have a long-term goal of keeping it like that also going forward. So we need then to look into new opportunities and work with those in order to both fight the decline, but also maximize the value of the assets we do have. There could be adjustments, but overall, like the materiality, I would say it's our goal on the long term. So yes, it does compete, but it's going to be hard, I think, to compete for capital. And we also now, of course, we have a huge renewables agenda and also low carbon solution agenda. It means that the capital needs to be then allocated across different business areas. So, okay, that's kind of some of my reflections on the portfolio side.
Absolutely, and we look forward to further on in this panel talking about the low carbon solutions and ideas as well, so thank you for that. Luca, similar question for you. Eni has historically been one of the most active E&Ps across Africa, and it continues to have a very healthy pipeline of projects across the continent. Balin, Nene Marine, Agogo. Why historically has it remained so attractive for Eni?
Thank you, Ross, for the question. I would say that Eni has been always considered the international African company. We are in Africa since more than 60 years, and we may vary from country to country, from 60 to 50, but our presence here has been always very, very intense. I would say that Africa is part of our DNA, and we do see, especially now, Africa to be confirmed to be a reliable continent for the energy supply to the rest of the world. And last but not least, to Europe, just for a geographic position. As you correctly said, we are involved in many projects that are expanding our footprint and our exposure. During the last 4 years, we have been spending more than 50% of our capex in this continent, and Africa is representing more than 50% in the production. What we are aiming to is not to move from oil to gas, but to add gas development, and we are proudly implementing projects that once the domestic market is fully satisfied and there is space for export, we do come in the picture. And you have been mentioning a Marine 12 LNG project in Congo. We are absolutely proud of this project because we have been able, with authorities, government, and partner support, to move the concept of the gas liability to a gas opportunity. Because once the domestic market is fully satisfied, when the power generation is run with the domestic gas, you don't have any other option, or you start reducing the production of oil, or you start implementing an export for the gas. And LNG for Congo has this aim. 3 million tons is not a huge volume, but it's quite an interesting volume, I would say, to bring Congo in this, let's say, segment of exporters of LNG. And it comes along with an extremely high needs of gas, both piping and LNG. And that's where we are. I'm sure that we'll go through some other projects during the panel, so I will not steal any more time. Thank you, Ross.
Yeah, we'll definitely come back to the gas story again as well. Thank you for that, Luca. Adibete, you're focused on Nigeria today, and we speak to E&Ps across the globe, and recurring theme is that Nigeria is a tough place to do business. What makes you successful there? Why is that impression wrong? And why will it become an increasingly attractive place for upstream investments going forward?
All right, thank you. I don't think Nigeria is a difficult place, as many people think. But you're correct that we've made a success of our play in Nigeria, and that success is built on 3 core pillars, what we call the 3 R's. We've set up ourselves to be robust, and our robustness means we deliberately choose to play a multi-sector integrated play in the way we set up. So we're not just upstream players, we also play in the midstream, and we've got a very tight integration between our upstream development, into midstream gas processing, into midstream modular refinery. The second pillar of our success is the second R, which is around redundancy. And what we try to do is, while we are integrated, we're able to operate each one of those footprints as an island. But more than that, we deliberately choose to create redundant paths to the market. And so for our upstream oil, we serve both export market and domestic market. For our midstream gas play, we serve both export market and domestic market. For our refinery products, we serve both export markets and domestic markets. So that level of redundancy to the market and with alternative physical paths to the market destination creates an hedge for us in the midst of turbulences that occur in our business. The third part, or the third R, is a consequence of the first two. Our robustness and our redundancy then makes us to be very resilient. And we saw that resilience come strongly to the fore in 2022 when practically all operators were curtailed from exports. We were able to continue to generate revenue because we had a domestic market that we were serving. But underpinning that is a workforce that is extremely talented, local, and very creative. And that's been what I would call the configuration of our success in Nigeria's Aradel Holdings.
Thank you for that. And we've seen a lot of improvements in everything from the fiscals to the regulatory as well in Nigeria in recent years, which we'll come back to.
Right.
Gas, it's come up a few times. So let's talk about gas and the energy transition. Everywhere we go, it doesn't matter the continent, everybody talks about gas as a transition fuel, whether in Latin America, the US with the expansion of LNG, in Europe with the need to replace gas supply, in the Asia Pacific region, and of course in the Middle East. Gas is talked about everywhere at every conference. But in Africa, there's an incredible gas potential. According to our database, the Welligence database, the continent has some of the biggest undeveloped gas opportunities in the world. East Africa, West Africa, everywhere. So with that, Nina, Equinor has discovered gas opportunities in Africa. How does that fit into your global portfolio, taking into account the fact that it's gas, as an additional layer to the question earlier around just your general portfolio?
Yeah, I think on a corporate level, we've had like 50% gas-ish, oil and gas over the years, for many years. However, it's been provided from other parts of the world and, sourcing gas primarily into Europe. We have had kind of an oil-heavy portfolio in Africa, but we would like to expand now and do more gas business in Africa. And on the portfolio level, I think it's extremely important that we will have good gas assets, primarily then and LNG, that we could have the flexibility to provide that in different markets. And it's a really attractive long-term time horizon for those type of projects. So it could fit really well into the portfolio. And we do see that renewables takes time, and we work now to prolong the oil and gas production and revenues in Equinor. And that means longevity for oil and gas is really a crucial thing. And then that type of profile from LNG projects, it's really attractive. So for that perspective, I think we will be interested in expanding more into gas in Africa. Thanks.
And continue on that, Rahul. Tullow has been a consistent supplier of gas to Ghana and has the potential to increase that supply. From your perspective, first, do you find investors are more comfortable with gas? And second, what is needed to scale up, and what are the necessary ingredients to catalyze the development of more gas supply in Africa?
So I think, firstly, I think you're right. So from a indigenous perspective, I think gas, as we've seen in Ghana, is a really important driver of economic growth, industrial development. For example, in Ghana, over 60% of the power supply now is gas driven. So clearly it's a big enabler for economic growth. I think as we look forward, we're now looking to double gas supply within Ghana, but I think the funding challenges are the same. So when you look at attracting capital, I think, and a lot of people have talked about it, attracting capital into Africa, you're competing really for a shrinking pot of money which is available for the oil and gas industry. Africa, we say it's about 10% of the global capital for the oil and gas industry comes to Africa. I think in order to deliver on the gas ambitions, the sustainability of oil, you probably need to double that share, right? So you go, you're really competing for capital in a tight market. Now, I think the challenges, and we don't talk enough about these, but I think it's important. I think that when you look at the challenges for attracting capital in Africa, it generally sits at the higher end of the cost of capital. And the reason being, there's an increased perception of risk. We look across probably a number of sub-Saharan countries are facing major debt crises. We look at the World Bank Index of Doing Business, probably 26 countries are in the sort of bottom quartile of that. We see geopolitical instability. So there's a lot of factors which kind of drive the increased kind of cost of capital and constrain access to it. I think specific to gas for domestic markets, obviously fair pricing is a big thing. But the other big thing which we're working on a lot with our host government in Ghana is to say, how do you put payment security without impairing the balance sheets of the host government? And I couldn't say that we have an answer to that, but certainly I think being able to create the security of payment without government support, I think would be something that would unlock the indigenous gas potential. And I'm hoping, when I'm here next year, we can talk more about that. The last bit I'd say is, again, and we were very encouraged when we saw, in Nigeria, for example, recently the government announced a really proactive approach where the industry, committed over $13 billion of capital in the near term to increase production to over 2 million barrels of oil per day, right? That gives you a sense of that the issues that I talk about in terms of risk and all can be mitigated by a much more proactive approach by the government. So I think the one thing I would say, and I see kind of there's certainly some senior ministers here in the room, is I think this is the time really, given the criticality and the limited access to capital, where host nations really need to work in very close partnership with companies to change the perception of risk of investing around Africa. And I think, as I say, I point to our experience in Ghana, I see what's happening in Nigeria. I think it's a solvable problem.
Absolutely. So on that front, Adibete, Aradel is growing and diversifying in Nigeria. You and I spoke about this, and you talked about earlier, oil, gas, renewables, integrated across both oil and gas value chains. You supply crude to a refinery, but you also supply gas to Nigerian LNG and the domestic market. So how do you see the future of gas picking up in Nigeria, which has, of course, tremendous resource?
The future of gas supply in Nigeria is very bright. Nigeria is supremely endowed in gas resources. We actually have more endowment in gas than we do in oil. At 206 trillion standard cubic feet, we've got the largest gas reserves in Africa. And a lot of that is accidental discovery on the basis of oil exploration. If we're to target the non-associated gas that has not been developed either to, we're looking at proven reserves in the neighborhood of over 600 TCF. So that's very huge. The bulk of the gas that we produce today in Nigeria is exported via the Nigerian liquefied natural gas. And that plant had operated either to on the strength of 6 trains, about 22 million metric tons. FID has been taken for the 7th train. And so there is a line of sight to the market, and that's going to stimulate a whole lot more of upstream gas development. But second to that is that the 2021 Petroleum Industry Act that was enacted is extremely rich in incentives and focus for gas development. So you see deliberate construct of fiscals and provisions within that act to stimulate gas development and to create an enabling framework, not just for gas for export, but for domestic usage. One of the challenges we're facing in Nigeria today is energy deficiency in terms of electricity. And clearly the shortest route to curing that is gas-fired power plants. And so what we're seeing today is a recalibration of not just the fiscals from the Petroleum Industry Act, but an improvement in the payment conditions in the adjunct electricity sector to create comfort for upstream gas producers like ourselves to go deliberately into focused gas delivery, knowing fully well that you get paid. And more recently, as a response to the deregulation of PMS, the government of the day is actively pushing gas as an alternative fuel for transportation. So there's a whole lot more focus now on CNG for motor vehicles and to also displace AGO. So the bases are right there to ensure that producers are incentivized to go more into focused gas development and supply. So the future really looks bright. And I think in the next few years, we start seeing these in the increasing numbers of gas production, and coupled with ongoing efforts in the industry to resolve above ground evacuation challenges that we have, we will definitely see an uptick in gas supply from Nigeria.
Thank you for that. And that's a key message, of course, supplying the domestic markets versus LNG and how to manage that. Luca, on that point, Eni, of course, is just a huge developer of gas across Africa, with the company active and supplying the majority of its gas domestically in the countries in which it operates, but also in FLNG. You have projects in Congo, Mozambique, and potentially elsewhere across Africa. Why has Eni been so attracted to FLNG? Why is that part of the future?
I would say that the floating LNG that has been now cleared in terms of technology that does really work. I believe that the commissioning phase of our Coral Sud has been proving that we will not wait anymore 2 or 3 years in order to have a fully unit, let's say, commissioned. That's the first reason. So the technology has been clear and to be workable. The second one is that whenever in the previous time we were thinking to LNG, we were always thinking to 25 plus years, huge, let's say, project, very much capex intensive. And LNG was in some way very difficult to be sanctioned as a project because you may need several JV, feeding the gas for the plant. So it was a bit complicated. I'm not saying that we'll not have any more big plant LNG, but we found in the floating LNG a kind of a flexibility that we may need in order to move from country to country and to have the time to market that we are continuously targeting as Eni. So for us, floating LNG means that if you have enough resource, in 36 months you can have LNG production. That is a very ambitious target, and that's what we are aiming to with Congo LNG, again, for example. The other big advantages in terms of flexibility is that you don't need any more tens of TCF in order to go for LNG, but you may consider few TCF because your installation in some way is mobile. So so potentially there will not be any more stranded gas that can be converted to LNG because when it's over, you move and you have still the unit, the floating unit. So the attractiveness of this solution is because of flexibility, because of minor investment, quicker time to market, and economics.
Yeah, the execution speed and how that impacts the NPV and is critical. Looking at the future of Africa, the makeup of the E&Ps plays a key role in the output. So I'd like to focus on the different players, of course, on this panel, majors, independents, and maybe even potential consolidation that we can see in the space. Gbite, looking at Nigeria, do you see a growing opportunity for the independents, as I think it's well known that majors divest? And then do you see bigger opportunities elsewhere in the region for independents? Because that's where we see a huge opportunity, first in Nigeria and potentially elsewhere.
Oh, yes, I do. If you look at the landscape in Nigeria, about 50 years ago, we had probably less than 7 operators, and they were all international oil companies. About 30 years ago, we started seeing the coming into existence of indigenous operators like ourselves. And over the last 30 years, the company has no less than 30 different indigenous independent operators today. And the independents have grown from just managing marginal fields to managing OMLs, mining leases. And we've also seen in the last 12 to 15 years, continuous piecemeal divestment of these acreages, especially in the onshore swamp and shallow offshore by the international majors. And the people that have been stepping in have been the independents, and they've been running that well. A case in point is ourselves and a few of our partners. We acquired the divested interest of the majors in OML 34, which is an asset of strategic national importance, probably the biggest supplier of gas into the domestic market. We've run that for 11 years now, very successfully. With the oil majors taking a decision to beat a retreat from the onshore and moving into deep water as a result of many reasons which we can't talk about now, we've developed the independence capacity within country to step in comfortably into that space. Aradel is a company today with about 300 staff. Every single one of them is a Nigerian. It's not, we don't like other persons, but I say that to underscore the fact that we've got the indigenous capacity to deal with that. And a lot of the issues on the onshore are local issues that local people are best suited to address. So it's a huge opportunity for us, and we are putting our hearts into the ring. And when those opportunities arise, we are confident we're going to do a great job.
Thank you for that. And obviously you are doing a great job across the value chain. Rahul, continuing on that theme, how do you see the outlook in Africa for mid-sized independents like Tullow? I know we spoke a little bit about this, but why is now the right time for more nimble players?
Well, I'll echo what Gbite said, which is about the opportunity set, which I referred to earlier as well, which is created by the larger companies kind of exiting the mid to late life. And that's been how the industry's kind of worked, right, over decades, where the independents typically will do things, which is what I call the white space, that the big companies kind of leave behind. So I think that space is definitely increasing. Having said that, I think there is a real challenge that our part of the industry faces, which is really around access to capital. And let me first start with the equity, where really I would say the independent sector is now become so small that it doesn't really gather attention from the equity markets. So there is a genuine kind of scale issue in terms of the size of sort of the individual companies. I think there's also, which was discussed at the panel earlier, is the traditional sources of capital of funding, which has been the banks in particular, the Western banks. I think that source of capital is kind of dried up. So you have this sort of paradox where there is at least in my career, kind of once in a generation opportunity faced with a kind of once in a generation sort of constraint around access to capital. So what do you do with that, and where does that take us? And I think, my sense, again, I'm an optimist, so I will think, I think the industry structures will change. So over my career in the last 35 years, I've seen where funding comes from changes. So you'll continue to see that change. You'll see African institutions, African banks. You're going to see the traders. So you're going to see a diversification or a shift away from the traditional sources of funding. I think that's going to be key. I think the second also, and I think that's probably not great news for the organizers of this conference, I think the number of companies in this sector, I think, will shrink as well. Because logically, if you think through this, at this stage in the evolution of this industry, given its level of maturity, we just have too many kind of small companies. So I think at some point, the laws of economics are going to drive a degree of consolidation, I think, which will also address the limited scale.
And moving in, and we'll touch back on the sources of capital as well here in a minute, but moving, Luca, to E&I, you have this huge Azul partnership that's enabled E&I and BP to be at the forefront of activity in Angola. Do you see more of these strategic partnerships in the region, and what are the sort of benefits of those?
Yes, we do see additional opportunities. A bit of background on Azul. Azul has the, let's say, the aim of being a national company with an international back office, backup. So, and that's why we are going to consider, hopefully, an indigenous company in Angola. And that was let's say, was not an experiment, but something that we have been discussing with our partner BP for the business combination, to join effort and to gain on synergies, and also to, let's say, to create this national entity that is, let's say, focused on Angola, optimizing all the development. If you like, is this what we call satellite model is a different way of sourcing financing from the market, because everybody has his own limitation. We know that transition does cost money. And in order to fully finance the ambitious program of the transition, we are moving along with this satellite model. Every entity will be self-financing on the market, and also gives also credit to the quality of the project, because Azul needs to go to the market in order to have the project financed. So must be a very, very good project aligned with the strategy and the ESG requirements. So this one is a plus, reputationally wise, that is not unlocking capital, but trusting the way forward for the next 20, 30 years. We are working on some other, let's say, business combination worldwide, not only in Africa. And also we are considering with BP to expand the perimeter of Azul. We might extend to nearby countries whenever we do have synergies, because we believe that the model is very much, let's say, working. At least after the first year, no regret, absolutely happy, and looking forward to increase the capacity of. And I would say that it is also very welcome from government, from local authorities, because give again a reputation standing whereby to measure, they do trust a national company to have a growth normally. So you should trust the country as much as you can in order to deploy such a, let's say, business combination to be a national entity. So if you look from the Angolan side, is a testimony of trust. And of course, a part of the value that you are getting from a dollar's point of view, there is a value reputationally wise that can increase the standing of the country as well. So the answer to your question is yes, expanding the perimeter and adding a business combination. It's not always easy. There are pros and cons, but overall the pros are far above the cons.
And one of the sort of major pros is using, multiple technologies in these partnerships, multiple solutions. And to that point, Nina, I'd like to ask you, what do you see as being next for Equinor in the region? And more specifically, what solutions can be used, whether from across the industry, your portfolio, et cetera, what can be used in Africa to drive low carbon solutions?
As a starting point, I think it will be one of the really important indicators to compete with, and I am kind of concerned when I do see the CO2 intensity in at least our African portfolio compared to on the corporate level, which is like at least twice as high as the average in Equinor operated fields other places. So what are the things we can provide in the partnerships in order to improve when it comes to the CO2 competitiveness. And I think is a lot of experience from other, fields, and we work really well with, Sula and other companies in order to reduce the emissions. And I think, like there are two main areas, and like one of them being more like the optimizing, the flaring part, and also do like the technical modifications in order to improve the efficiency, reduce the number of turbines, and also work with some of the, energy efficiency in general for the fields, which makes a huge difference. And flaring in itself is still a huge kind of waste. I don't think there's any room to move forward with assets without the gas solution in the future, like period. Non-routine flaring is going to be, a kind of a requirement all over the place, at least from our perspective. And then there are more like transformational things we can work with. We have, for instance, now started the first floating wind turbines providing power for offshore fields. And that will take down the emissions with 20% for 2 major fields. It's a combined solution with 11 turbines, and that will make kind of a huge difference. So those are more the transformational things we could work with. Also electricity from onshore, which is potentially possible in Africa by investing in renewables, or if there is available renewable power in the grid. So I think if we combine like solar, wind, hydro, and combine those into our assets and work to reduce emissions like scope 1 and 2. So those are the things we need to do more of. And I see a lot of it's a high interest, I would say, in the industry in general. And the operators, at least the ones we work with in Africa, I think we share a lot of these ambitions. But it's going to be key. And it's also within LNG, there's a lot to be done to reduce the intensity. Thank you.
And certainly 2 of Equinor's last projects that it's announced are some of the lowest carbon projects in the world. So a lot of technology to continue to roll out across your portfolio and others across the world. As we kind of wind things down, the purpose of this panel is to look at how Africa can be an even larger contributor. And I want to ask each of you how Africa will continue to stay competitive. Starting with you, Rahul. You talked about the sources of capital becoming more challenging, not Africa specific, but globally first. Just very simply put, what are the keys or the key for Africa being competitive from an investment standpoint for you?
So like I said, the resource is there, both oil and gas. I think it's about attracting capital. And I think the key there is, to me, a very strong collaboration between the host nations and the industries in a way that we haven't really worked before.
Gbite, Nigeria has been progressively improving terms, fiscal, regulatory, et cetera, the PIA being one example. What else needs to continue to be done for Nigeria to stay competitive? What is your thought?
So the enactment of the Act, it's a very positive thing. I think what needs to be done next is to test it. And to test it means for us as operators to leverage every aspect of that for our investment. It means for us to leverage it for the purpose of decarbonization, for the purpose of deepening our gas play, for the purpose of integrated play, for the purpose of host community harmony. The PIA comes with a lot of constructs which, if well executed by the operators and by the regulators, offers immense canvas of opportunity for us to move our industry forward. So what I would say to all the operators, including ourselves, is let's test it. Let's get cracking on it.
And lastly, as we sort of wind down, Luca, Nina, any final thoughts on Africa maintaining a competitive edge?
Nina first, please.
Well, I think we should do as much as possible, as fast as possible. And I think we have 5 years-ish to do the most we can do within our portfolios. I do we do feel the pressure strongly for oil and gas, and we get pressure all over the world. This is not about Africa. So I think to move fast is going to be really important, and the stability on the fiscal terms. We have acknowledged or seen over the years that we have quite high stability and also now improved terms, for instance, in Angola for increased oil recovery to improve the incentives. So, that we're really happy to see those things happening. It will revitalize and unlock new investments in Angola, like an example. Thank you.
I will be very, 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 very short. I believe that resources are there, technology is there. What we may need a bit more from Africa in the next coming years is to be convinced that Africa can play and has to play a major role in the transition. So they do have all the characteristics to be a major player. So let's make sure that all the government, all the country, they do understand that they can play a first line role rather than a second or a third line. So opportunities are there. So let's make it happening because we need Africa, full stop.
Well, with that, that concludes our session on securing global energy demand with Africa's resources. Thank you again to the panelists, and enjoy the rest of your conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you.